Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US President Trump says he hopes to get the Gaza situation straightened out in the next week, while his envoy Steve Witkoff confirmed he will meet senior Qatari officials in New Jersey on Sunday. Witkoff added he is hopeful about making progress on ceasefire negotiations to end the ongoing conflict. The European Union said it will extend its pause on countermeasures to the United States tariffs until early August while pushing for a negotiated deal. This comes after President Trump threatened a 30% tariff on most EU and Mexican imports starting on August the 1st, giving countries weeks to strive framework agreements. Russia and China's foreign ministers met in Beijing to discuss relations with the United States and prospects for ending the war in Ukraine. Russia's Sergei Lavrov and China's Wang Yi also prepared for the upcoming Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. Frustration among Palestinians towards the US mounted on Sunday as mourners filled the roads near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank to bury two men killed by settlers. Palestinian health officials say a 21-year-old Palestinian American was beaten to death while another local was shot in the chest. The United States military and Panamanian police conducted new exercises to safeguard the strategic Panama Canal. The drills come amid rising tensions over alleged Chinese influence in the region and the crucial trade route security. A gunman has killed two women at a Baptist church in Lexington, Kentucky, and wounded two men, authorities have said. The suspect then shot and injured a state trooper outside an airport before police fatally shot him, Police Chief Lawrence Weathers has confirmed. Donald Trump has formally accepted an invitation from King Charles III for an unprecedented second visit to the United Kingdom this September. Trump and the First Lady will be hosted at Windsor Castle from September 17th to the 19th, with a full ceremonial welcome and state banquet planned. At least 8 Palestinians, most of them children, were killed and dozens were wounded in central Gaza while collecting water yesterday. Local officials have said the Israeli military confirmed the missile malfunctioned and missed its intended Islamic Jihad target, landing dozens of meters away. US President Donald Trump told reporters on Sunday that talks are ongoing over Israel's conflict in Gaza and said he hopes to see progress in the coming week. Even as ceasefire negotiations in Doha remain stalled, let's listen in to what he said.
We are talking and hopefully we're going to get that straightened out over the next week. Let's see what happens.
The United States is backing a 60-day ceasefire proposal that includes a phased release of hostages, Israeli military withdrawals from parts of Gaza, and negotiations aimed at ending the conflict. Meanwhile, Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, said that he remains hopeful about the Gaza ceasefire talks. Speaking to reporters in Teterboro, New Jersey, Witkoff added that he would meet senior Qatari officials later in the day on the sidelines of the FIFA Club World Cup final. We're now joined by Bergzine Wagmar, who joins us from the Center of Iranian Studies, located in London. Thank you very much for joining us. Bergzine, there was optimism until a couple of days ago, until we got some news that these ceasefire talks have now stalled. What are your thoughts on the progress of a 60-day pause in the fire from both sides? Do you think there's any success? There's going to be any success in these negotiations?
No, none at all. And insofar as I'm concerned, the talks in Doha are about to collapse. So there's no question of a 60-day truce being introduced. The problem is that Hamas is not willing to accede to an Israeli demand, which seems perfectly sensible, to extend the perimeter corridor from 1 to 2 kilometers near the Rafah border crossing. That is what Israel expects, or at least the IDF does, insofar as it needs to frisk the Palestinians on ground to check for weapons and then let them proceed as such. This is what Hamas is stalling against. And the Palestinians would like to make out, as they have in some remarks, that it is Israel which is biding time by Netanyahu making visits to DC and announcing it later, and this, that, and the other. But the problem is that these Hamas claims are baseless, because it only wants to show that the IDF wishes to legitimize reoccupation of Gaza, when the IDF's purpose is there to actually check on Hamas and what they're doing. The very fact that Hamas has strength still to set up booby traps in abandoned buildings and kill IDF soldiers on ground points to that. And then there's the question of humanitarian aid, which has been of grave concern. That is true.
Of course.
But then when the UN Chief Tom Fletcher on Friday announced that 14,000 infants are about to die in 48 hours due to malnutrition, that was absolutely alarming and downright fake, because the BBC then itself checked with the UN Office for International Coordination for Human Affairs, and they in turn relayed that the said 14,000 deaths could occur in a calendar year, not within 48 hours. So we have gripes and information on the ground too, and for Tom Fletcher from the UN aid mission to even make a remark to that effect is absolutely irresponsible.
But Berzin, I believe he did retract that statement after he made it. And also we do have...
But the damage is done.
And I understand.
Because the damage is done in that people will believe the worst of Israel and obviously only see Palestinian plight in question.
Also,
but it was highly irresponsible.
Yes. Also, we have, obviously you've mentioned it briefly about the aid that is a talking point in this deal. Israel have refused letting in aid from previous organizations like the United Nations, who were delivering aid before the Israeli and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, who the UN now thinks is responsible for almost 800 deaths in the space of 6 weeks. Why is this such a crucial point for Israel to not let credible, experienced aid distribution methods back into Gaza?
The contention has been, the IDF's, is that the UN ought to work in tandem with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Yes, a criticism which can be leveled against Israel is that more aid distribution sites ought to be opened up. That is true. But
also that they've been killing people, no? That Israel have been shooting people at these aid sites, according to the allegations coming from the area.
Yes, but the point is, why is the UN steadfastly very obdurate in not working in cooperation with the GHF, which is backed by Washington? What is the UN's gripe with that? And of course, there are one too many gripes with UN bodies like UNRWA, who are absolutely, tainted with prejudice insofar as Israel goes. And that goes back to the very start of the October 7th massacre and what was discovered with Hamas officials ensconced within UNRWA and the likes of it. So there's more of that same, which is depressingly familiar.
Okay, Berzin Wagmar, you are staying with us to discuss more updates from the region. We have some more updates. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian was reportedly slightly injured during one of Israel's airstrikes on Iran last month. According to Iranian state media, 6 bombs targeted the access and entry points of a secret underground facility in Tehran on June the 16th. Meanwhile, the Iranian president was attending an emergency meeting of the Supreme National Security Council. The report claims Pezeshkian sustained leg injuries while escaping through an emergency shaft, and that Tehran is now investigating possible infiltration by Israeli agents. Israel has not officially commented on the incident. Last week, the Iranian president publicly accused Israel of trying to assassinate him, with Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant denying it, saying regime change was never a goal of the war. We're once again joined by Berzine Wagmar. Berzine, how credible are these Iranian reports that the Iranian president was directly targeted and injured in an Israeli airstrike? Yoav Gallant has denied this. What evidence has been presented so far?
Well, the evidence has been that the building in question in northwest Tehran, the lower floors of the said structure were damaged, and that a meeting was being conducted there, and the president was present on site. It is likely that this much is true. But then the question is this, how is it that the president has been targeted? For Israel to find disgruntled Iranians willing to conduct such acts and intelligence on the ground is not exactly difficult at this point in time. And it can be said with the stunning success of Israel during the 12-day war campaign that 90% of intelligence has been local on ground, all thanks to disgruntled Iranians and the system under which they chafe. For example, Iran's police chief Ali Radan mentioned to Fars News Agency that about 10,000 micro drones have been discovered within metropolitan Tehran, which can be operated through AI, and those have been allegedly noted to kill many scientists as well as corps commanders and the like. You just wonder, how do they come on site and within the heart of the capital city? Then there's the question of assembling drones within Iran itself. Mobile sites have been discovered. So that goes to point out that Iran has been completely penetrated, and that the intelligence agencies have come out with egg on their face. And they are desperate to make up for that and find some credibility and project strength. And to do so, there has been a spate of executions and arrests, all of which have been called out by human rights observers abroad, because the said arrests target Iranians, but have been disproportionately focused on ethno-linguistic minorities, Sunni minorities in question, actually. And we saw the recent exodus of Afghan refugees from Tehran, from Iran itself, because the government in Tehran maintains that they were Israeli spies, which of course flies in the face of credibility, because most of these Pashtuns are just semi-literate, if not illiterate workers on Tehran's construction sites. I mean, what exactly were they going to give Jerusalem in terms of intelligence beggars belief.
Yes, Berzine, you are staying with us once again for our next story. The US Federal Aviation Administration and Boeing have confirmed that fuel switch locks on Boeing planes are safe. This comes after a deadly Air India Boeing 787 crash that killed 260 people and raised concerns over fuel cutoff switches. The FAA issued a notification on July the 11th stating there is no unsafe condition that requires an airworthiness directive. Boeing sent a similar message to airlines. Air India's crash report highlighted the 2018 FAA advisory that urged inspections, but Air India didn't act as it was not mandatory. Alpha India is now calling for a fair probe and wants to join the investigation. Now we're once again joined by Berzine Wagmar. Berzine, what are your thoughts on the fallout of the Air India crash, the tragic Air India crash, which resulted of the deaths of over 275 people, including on the ground? How significant is this statement that there is no unsafe condition with Boeing's fuel switch locks, despite the crash and previous advisories? Apologies, we seem to have had some technical issues there. Hopefully we're joined once again by Berzine in just a second. We are once again covering the fallout of the Air India 787 crash, a crash that tragically struck the city of Ahmedabad. We're once again joined by Berzin Wagmar to discuss this further. Okay, my apologies, we have lost Berzin there. Hopefully he joins us again soon. But for our next story, we move on to the United States, where US President Donald Trump has announced that his administration will send Patriot missile systems to Ukraine. Speaking at Joint Base Andrews, Trump said Ukraine desperately needs them. He slammed Russian President Vladimir Putin for saying one thing and doing another, accusing him of bombing civilians. Trump did not specify how many Patriot batteries would be sent, but confirmed Ukraine will receive some. Let's listen in to the US president.
I haven't agreed on the number yet, but they're going to have some because they do need protection. But the European Union is paying for it. We're not paying anything for it, but we will send it. It'll be business for us, and we will send them Patriots, which they desperately need, because Putin really surprised a lot of people. He talks nice, and then he bombs everybody in the evening. So there's a little bit of a problem there. I don't like.
He also recently approved weapons sales to NATO allies to support Kyiv. Trump is expected to meet NATO chief Mark Rutte this week. He has promised a major statement on Russia by Monday, including possible offensive weapons. We're now joined by our guest, Spencer Critchley, who's a communication strategist. He joins us from California. Thank you very much, Spencer, for joining us on the program. We've seen another U-turn from Trump once again. Spencer, how significant is it that Trump has decided to, in fact, send these Patriot missiles to Kyiv, and how might it change the balance on the battlefield?
Well, I think it's very good news, and it'll make a big difference. And I think the only person who is surprised by Vladimir Putin's behavior is Donald Trump. He has, of course, been warned that this is exactly who Vladimir Putin is all the way along, not just by Democrats, but by many of the Republican members of Congress who know anything at all about Russia and international affairs generally. And I'm sure he would have seen the warnings in his daily intelligence brief if he bothered to read those briefs, and if he hadn't been so busy purging people from the intelligence services who might dare to tell him the truth. That said, I think, this is finally the right decision after calling Zelensky, of all people, a dictator, and as the obstacle to peace, the head of the country that has been invaded, that is trying to become a democracy, a fully fledged democracy and an ally to the United States and the other Western countries. Trump has finally, after trying every other alternative, at least for today, made the right decision. And of course, Patriot missiles have a tremendous record of shooting down incoming missiles and will no doubt make a huge difference to Ukraine.
Spencer, Trump has accused Putin of bombing civilians now. How might this affect the rhetoric that's already tense currently? Do you think this is a permanent stance that Trump now has on Vladimir Putin? We have seen him change over and over again, and obviously one cannot tell what Donald Trump is going to do tomorrow. However, his new outlook seems to be that he is getting used to how Vladimir Putin works and is possibly learning about his true intentions.
Yes, and of course it's not just rhetoric, it's a simple statement of the facts dawning this late on Trump, that yes, Vladimir Putin bombs civilians. He's been doing that from the start in Ukraine, deliberately targeting residential areas, apartment buildings, hospitals, directing his troops to kidnap tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands. It's unclear what the limit is here, of Ukrainian children, taking them away from their parents and placing them with families in Russia, where they then go through re-education to convince them that they're actually Russian children. This is a surprise, again, only to Donald Trump. It is who Putin has been all along. You can ask the people of Chechnya and Georgia. You can ask the people of Russia who dare to disagree with him. You know, it's often, I think, a problem of the coverage of this issue that we don't step back and realize just what we're dealing with here. This is not a normal dispute between peer nations. Putin has returned Russia to really a place outside of civilization. He represents barbarism in the same way that Stalin did as the leader of the Soviet Union, in the same way that Hitler and Mussolini did on the Axis side. And I think it's extremely important not to just see this as a matter of trying to negotiate differences and giving a little here and taking a little there the way one would in a normal international dispute, even, you know, among very different countries with very different ideologies. This really is a battle over what the future of civilization might look like.
Yes, Spencer, thank you very much for your insight. You are staying with us to discuss the related developments. Ukraine's Secret Service has said it has killed Russian FSB agents suspected of assassinating Colonel Ivan Voronich in Kiev. The SBU confirmed a special operation to arrest the suspects who resisted and were, quote, liquidated. Voronich, a senior SBU officer, was shot dead last week in broad daylight. The SBU believes a man and woman tracked him and carried out the attack. Video shows two bodies at the scene. Voronich reportedly planned operations in Russia's occupied areas. The SBU says the agents hid after shooting but were located. Russia has not yet commented on the incident and the investigation continues. We now stay in Europe for our next story. French President Emmanuel Macron has unveiled plans for a sharp rise in defence spending, citing growing security threats in Europe. Speaking ahead of Bastille Day, Macron said France must strengthen its military to remain a global power and defend its freedom. The new plan envisions a substantial increase in funding over the next 2 years, pushing the total defence budget to nearly double what it was a decade ago. The focus will be on advanced technologies, ground-to-air defences and cybersecurity. Macron stressed this expansion won't be funded through new debt, but through strategic adjustments in national priorities. Let's have a look at what the French president had to say.
Le budget des armées en 2017 était de 32 milliards d'euros. S'ajoutera à la loi de programmation militaire actuelle un effort de 3,5 milliards d'euros en 2026 et de 3 milliards d'euros supplémentaires l'année suivante. Nous consacrerons donc 64 milliards d'euros pour notre défense en 2027. C'est le double du budget dont les armées disposaient en 2017.
We're once again joined by Spencer Critchley, who is a communications strategist, to discuss this update. Spencer, this obviously comes after Donald Trump called on NATO countries to increase their defence spending, most of which have now agreed to a 5% of GDP cap. However, you have the likes of Spain who have rejected that. However, how will France, doubling France's defence budget, reshape its role within NATO and the EU at the time of growing threats from Moscow?
It's really striking how the security picture has changed in Europe just in the last few months with Trump coming back into office, so that Europe now plays a leading role in the defense of Europe. I'm sorry, France plays a leading role in the defense of Europe. And if you just go back to World War II and look at the changes to see how Germany's role in Europe has changed so dramatically, moving, of course, from a worldwide aggressor to one of the leading democracies and one that had renounced the use of arms. And now even it is boosting its defense budget dramatically. But to see France now as stepping into the gap left by the United States and emerging as not just a leading conventional power, but of course a leading nuclear power, eclipsing the United Kingdom in that role, yet another shift in priorities of place in the European security scene. I think that Macron has it right. He spoke with great clarity just now in the clip that you played about the true scale of the threat that Russia poses here. Again, there is a temptation to think that we might look at this the way we were looking at it in the 1990s, for example, when we were hoping Russia would join the community of nations. Certainly distinctive, certainly with its own culture and history and its own priorities. And those priorities could well conflict with others from time to time. But the way Russia has emerged, as I was just saying a few moments ago, really amounts to a reversion to barbarism. And this kind of rhetoric I'm normally not at all comfortable with, but I agree with President Macron that this is really a situation where we have to be aware that civilization is at stake, and that requires more than just governments negotiating with each other and boosting their defense budgets or not boosting them. I think it requires all of the citizens of democracies to understand that they too have a role to play now to stand up for democracy and not just sort of sleepwalk what could be through a truly epochal period of history, and one that could end up in the way that none of us want.
Yes, Spencer, indeed. We now move on once again. China has praised its relationship with Russia as strategically valuable during Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's visit to Beijing. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi emphasized that the Russia-China partnership stands at the most stable, mature and strategically important relationship between major global powers today. The two ministers discussed a range of pressing global issues. Both sides expressed their commitment to deepening comprehensive strategic cooperation and addressing the challenges. Meanwhile, Russia and China are engaged in talks surrounding the war in Ukraine and their respective relations with the United States. Lavrov's visit to Beijing also served as an opportunity to explore the prospects for resolving the war in Ukraine, as well as strategies for strengthening their positions in global forums such as the United Nations, the SCO, BRICS and the G20. Both countries reaffirmed their commitment to close coordination and collaboration on the international stage. While China claims neutrality on the Ukraine conflict, it has never condemned Russia's invasion, instead calling for an end to the fighting. Now we're once again joined by Spencer Critchley to discuss this further. Spencer, I've got a couple of questions for you here. How credible is this claim from Beijing of neutrality in Ukraine's war when Beijing continues its praise for its, quote, strategic ties with Moscow? And then second of all, what does China gain from this relationship with Moscow and calling it the most stable and strategically valuable among major powers?
I don't think it carries a great deal of credibility. The foreign minister of China reportedly met with the director of foreign affairs for the European Union in May, I believe it was. And according to a source present at the meeting, admitted basically that China has an interest in the Ukraine war continuing and would not want to see it end anytime soon, because China sees it as distracting the attention of the United States from China. And so China, if this is to be believed, and I think it's easy to believe it, would see the Ukraine war, the deaths of all of these civilians as well as soldiers, as a convenient foil simply to tie up the United States in its competition with China. It's incredibly cynical. Unfortunately, we see that sort of behavior in international affairs all too often. I also think it's incredibly short-sighted, and for China to claim to see Russia as perhaps its most valued strategic partner is hard to believe for another reason. China just has the most enormous potential and is definitely the senior partner in that relationship, and Russia is a failing state, beset by corruption and the incompetence that comes with dictatorial rule so predictably. When you suppress all freedom of speech and freedom of dissent, you create a culture of incompetence, and of course you encourage corruption when you run a dictatorship as essentially a crony capitalist kleptocracy. And so all of that is leading Russia to suffer enormous military losses in its war with Ukraine and suffer terrible damage to its economy. Its economy has been struggling for many years in any case. Russia is often described as a gas station with an economy because it creates so few products that other countries want to buy. It just pumps oil and sells oil. Meanwhile, China has achieved amazing progress, and yet, in my opinion, is squandering so much of its potential by going down this route of backing away from its initial liberalization after the death of Mao, and especially under Xi, becoming ever more authoritarian and risking suffering the same kind of fate that Russia has been suffering, which is the fate of authoritarian regimes in general. And as I say, even from the pure self-interest of China, given the incredible potential it has, the incredible talents of its people, the resources it has to command, the achievements it's made in educating its enormous population and industrializing after having to overcome all the handicaps imposed on it under Mao. You know, it's just got incredible potential and was beginning to realize that potential, and I think it's squandering it, frankly.
Spencer, what are your thoughts on China, the way it gets involved in foreign affairs? We've heard that that it preaches impartiality in this Ukraine conflict. However, it pushes for an end to the fighting. Do you think there's any real sign that China would ever push towards a negotiated settlement in Ukraine, or is that just diplomatic rhetoric? And I just want to get your thoughts on how China is moving here in regards to brokering deals, brokering peace deals, etc., etc.
Again, I think it's easy to believe that China sees it as it's more in its interest to prolong the Ukraine war, which, as I say, I think is just deeply, deeply cynical and irresponsible. If they were serious about achieving peace in Ukraine, they would not be providing so much support to Russia, not just moral support, but significant material support, reportedly including weapons. It really does seem very difficult to trust what Beijing is saying in this regard. And as I was saying earlier, it is not a matter where you can just say, well, these are the sorts of practical, realistic calculations that nations need to make sometimes, where they need to bend on their own principles in order to serve a larger objective they see as more valuable. This is really choosing to ally with a completely corrupt pariah state that's doing enormous damage to its neighbors and has been for a long time, and that poses a threat to the future of civilization as most people understand that word. And it's a reversion to barbarism, to essentially feudal times where only power matters. And you know, the torture and murder of civilians is just considered a normal part of doing business. And I think for China to ally itself with that and think that there's a future in that sort of behavior is not only obviously wrong, but short-sighted, unless China is counting on the devolution of the entire world into that kind of, you know, Hobbesian nightmare of raw power and aggression.
Yes, Spencer Critchley, thank you very much for your joining us on the program and for your insight. We now move over to North America for our next story, where President Trump has predicted a sharp increase in tariff revenue in the upcoming month, telling reporters at a joint base Andrews that duties on imports will soon reach what he described as extremely strong levels. Listen in to what he had to say.
The country made $25 billion last month, $25 billion. It hasn't done that in a long time, and a lot of that's done because of good management, and number one, and maybe even more importantly, the tariffs that are pouring in. We have tariffs pouring in at levels that we have never seen before, and they've only just started. That's really a small portion. It's mostly from cars and aluminum and steel, a little bit of lumber. But they'll really start in about another week. And then in about a month, they'll come in at levels that are extremely...
Trump also addressed trade relations with other countries, accusing some of maintaining closed markets while benefiting from access to the American economy. Trump said that the United States was not allowed to do business with those countries while they were allowed to do business in the United States, and further added that this was not considered a fair deal. We're now joined by Daniel Borman, who's a senior correspondent for the National Telegraph. He joins us from Toronto, Canada. Thank you very much, Daniel, for joining us on the program. How realistic is it, Daniel, that President Trump's prediction of a sharp increase in tariff revenue will affect the Americans in a positive way? And which countries or goods are going to be the most affected?
Well, I mean, if we look at the history of free trade versus protectionism, the tariffs will not bring prosperity unless this is the sort of the other part of Trump where you then pretend this is like, oh, it's going to bring prosperity because we're going to say tariffs and magic art of the deal powers, we're then going to have free trade instead of tariffs. So if the argument of your tariffs are going to be really successful because then they'll deter tariffs, then you might have a point. But, you know, the sort of the revenue you pay for increase, you know, tariffs is going to be borne by the American public. So the American public's going to pay it, and then maybe there'll be some government thing where he'll claim that he got some revenue collected at the border, and it could be, you know, spent on the people in some sort of socialist populist make work thing. That will always fail. So if the plan is to, like, you know, grow the economy through tariffs, then, you know, the economy is going to fail. But if the plan is to say tariffs and threaten tariffs and then whoopsie daisy, art of the deal, we now have free trade and trade deals, like, look at all the deals I have, then you could say the economy is going to do well. But so far, I think Donald Trump started a global trade war, and he has 2 trade deals to show. He has the UK, so he managed to not break the 2 largest countries in the Anglosphere, which wasn't on the table before he, you know, put it on the table, but he stopped himself successfully. And then Vietnam, the still communist state of Vietnam, he's managed to find out a deal with them, so there will be no part 2 to the Vietnam War. Other than that, he's still you know, has sort of just threatening tariffs to all the different countries in the world simultaneously, which might be the reason why things are slowly getting done, because it's not like he can fully leverage America against everyone at the same time all at once. That's a bit more difficult than just, you know, issuing a straight threat to, you say, the mullahs in Iran on a singular thing. But who knows? Maybe you know, maybe there'll be tariffs one day, and then the tariffs go away, and they come back, and they go away. Generally, the markets don't like the instability, and that's going to continue for, I think, as long as Donald Trump is president. We're going to be tariffs or deals. That's going to be the game. It's going to be, is it a tariff week or deal week? And you know, I think we're at a tariff week right now.
Yes, Daniel, thank you. We have a related development coming up next for our viewers. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has called for an urgent tariff deal with the United States before the August the 1st deadline. Speaking in Berlin, he warned that a 30% US tariff would deeply hurt Germany's export sector. Merz said he has held intensive talks with President Trump, EU chief von der Leyen and France's Macron. He stressed the need for a quick, simple agreement and admitted doubts over long-term US-EU alignment. Merz urged Europe to become more self-reliant. Let's listen in to the German Chancellor.
Aber nicht vor dem 1. August. Und ich habe das über das Wochenende sowohl mit Macron wie mit Ursula von der Leyen, am Freitag mit dem amerikanischen Präsidenten intensiv besprochen. Wir wollen diese Zeit jetzt nutzen, der 2,5 Wochen bis zum 1. August, um eine Lösung hinzubekommen. Und dafür engagiere ich mich wirklich intensiv. Die Verhandlungen waren schon ziemlich weit fortgeschritten. Das haben wir auch bei anderen Ländern gesehen. Kanada, China, es hat in vielen Fällen solche Briefe gegeben. Am Ende des Tages sind es auch Verhandlungspositionen gewesen. Und dann hat es meistens, nicht immer, aber meistens vernünftige Lösungen gegeben. Und für die setze ich mich auch für Europa ein.
We're once again joined by Daniel Borman. Daniel, do you think a, quote, quick and simple deal is realistic before the August the 1st deadline, given the complexity of transatlantic trade disputes?
Both yes and no.
Okay.
So I think yes, because Donald Trump must want some sort of deal for a deal's sake. That it depends on how you sell it. Can you sell something, and sort of band-aid it to go forward? But again, sort of dealing with the European Union is in itself a long bureaucratic process, as you're dealing with a sort of confederation of states that have agreed to certain terms, and then you come as an outside entity. So just changing any of that requires this consent of many different states at a time. So, like feasibly, like some large-scale, significant structural rearrangement of U.S.-European relations that can come up within a month unilaterally? No, that's not how the world works. But can you play deal or no deal with Donald Trump and say, okay, we want a quick super deal, and let him name the deal? I think that's, if we've learned anything, let him name the deal and call it, a super quick efficiency deal. And then you do the super quick efficiency deal. You shake hands and you say, oh, wow, like that was really super, really quick and really efficient. We now have better trade relations on dairy. He's mad at Canada over dairy. I'm mad at Canada over dairy. So, maybe you control the Canadians, which he seems to like to do by working on a dairy deal with the Europeans, right? You just let them sell cheese or something. Just let them sell cheese, or let them do a thing and then declare it a super whatever deal, and then just everyone kind of has to live with it. Yeah, that's something that could get done with Donald Trump, because again, he has all these different threats with all these different countries. He doesn't have the time and resources to dedicate to all of them naturally, right? At some point, you would want to make a deal. So this is the Trump world.
Daniel, apologies, we haven't got much time left. However, we originally saw the EU prepare retaliatory measures for these tariffs before they were postponed. We only saw this tit-for-tat tariff raise with China that happened previously. However, do you think now we're going to see that much more frequently, this tit-for-tat tariff policy? And what do you think the outcome will be, that if Donald Trump is going to have to deal with multiple retaliations at once?
Where Donald Trump's strategy can make sense in a pure one-on-one tit-for-tat market. So if Donald Trump had just, let's say, from our perspective as Canadians, just focused on Canada, and it was a Canada versus US thing, he could sort of threaten the maximum and then get us to sort of capitulate. But because it started, like, it's not an individual game, right? He's starting the same game publicly with every other country in the world simultaneously. So then the game is not just a one-on-one, like, yeah, Canada can't win a tit-for-tat versus America, right? It's America, right? And we're still, no one can actually do that. But can the world raise a tit-for-tat? And you go, okay, if America doesn't have secure trade deals, like they have the UK, they got a trade deal which was, I think not as good as what it was before, but Trump did it. The quality of the trade deal doesn't seem to be important. It seems to be the branding. And then you have, Vietnam. So this is the thing. If he wants to go the entire world at one time, then yes, tit for tat can teach him that fire is hot. He's not going to want to hurt the U.S. economy, because once the U.S. economy starts doing well, he's going to lose his base and his general support. So America would impoverish itself by starting a global trade war with everyone simultaneously all at once, which is the insane thing that they're threatening to do to save the world on trade. I'm not Trump's trade advisor. There's different factions of the Republican Party, clearly. Some of them are more isolationist and protectionist, and this sort of populist base that is sort of just on the sort of vibes and likes the owning the libs. And then you have the old school, conservative, Reaganites who, believe in, who I guess it's like the J.D. Vance versus Marco Rubio type conservatives here. So the Marco Rubio type conservatives there is people in the Republican Party that definitely see, remember, can't bring in Javier Milei, the Prime Minister of Argentina, who's done the free trade thing, cut the government, free libertarian markets, massive economic growth. There is a part of the Republican Party that looks at the guy in Argentina and says, no, can we just do that, which is the exact opposite of what Donald Trump is doing right now. So there is a faction in the Republican Party that likes free trade and likes free markets and freedom in general. Can they win out over the own the libs, protectionists, time to take America back from, the ghost of Barack Obama?
Yes. Daniel Borman, thank you very much for joining us once again, and thank you for your insight on the program. We now move on. US President Donald Trump recently called for Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell to step down. Trump expressed frustration with Powell's policies, particularly the FED's decision to keep interest rates in a narrow range since December amid the ongoing global trade tensions. Let's listen in to what he said.
I think if Jerome Powell stepped down, it would be a great thing. I don't know that he's going to, but he should. Jerome Powell's been very bad for our country. We should have the lowest interest rate on earth, and we don't. He just refuses to do it, and yet he's spending $2.5 billion rebuilding the Fed, the Federal Reserve building. And I don't know what he knows about building, but you talk about cost overrun. So he got this approved, and he started the work during the Biden administration, and he doesn't look like the kind of a guy, frankly, that wants to spend...
Trump has repeatedly urged the FED to implement sharp rate cuts, even as Powell's term as chair runs until May the 15th. The White House intensified its criticism last week with Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought accusing Powell of grossly mismanaging the central bank, citing fiscal mismanagement and cost overruns for renovations. While the Federal Reserve Act limits the president's power to remove FED officials, the administration's rhetoric raises questions about whether they may be attempting to build a case for Powell's removal. We're now joined by Madhav Nalapat, who's the editor of the Sunday Guardian. He joins us live from New Delhi. Professor Nalapat, thank you very much for joining us. How unprecedented is it for a sitting United States president to openly call for the resignation of the Federal Reserve chairman?
Well, Donald Trump is a very unusual president, and very frankly, I think he's taking a very big risk. The Republicans are supposed to be a party that's against very high deficits. It's supposed to be against a party that's against bloated government spending. They want the private sector to spend. But instead of focusing on supply bottlenecks, which is what he should be doing, he's focusing on lowering interest rates and making money much cheaper, and frankly, the risk of inflation much higher. Jerome Powell, you're talking about $2 billion, a lot of money for the Federal Reserve building. I don't think that's a valid argument. That's a pretty, there are some buildings in Washington that are not modern by any standard. They've been there for decades. And the Federal Reserve is one such building. So I think it badly needs renovation, both the interiors as well as the exterior. So I don't think $2 billion is a very high estimate for that. But they're trying to skew up Powell as a high spender when he's against government spending. Well, the fact of the matter is that there have been record deficits under President Trump. There's been record spending under President Trump. And very frankly, that's upended traditional Republican policy. Now, of course, Republicans are keeping quiet. This president is still very, very popular. And he's, of course, a very shrewd man. But the reality of the situation is going after the Fed chairman is not, frankly, in my view, advisable. And I'm not sure he will be able to succeed in getting him out, because Jerome Powell is not going anywhere. I don't think he trusts President Trump. He certainly doesn't trust his ability to control budget. He certainly doesn't trust his ability to ensure that there is a sufficient reduction in deficit spending. So he's not going anywhere, and he's going to basically try and dare the administration to throw him out. If that happens, it will cause a tremor in financial markets, not only in the US, but worldwide. So in my view, Trump has been very badly advised to take on Powell, and I think he should let Powell be where he is and serve out the remainder of his term. They've got about a year more to go. And I think Trump should just wait out that 1 year rather than create a kind of a conflict with the Fed chairman, public conflict with the Fed chairman at this point in time.
Yes, indeed, Madhav Nalapat. We now move on to another US-related development, where Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear has confirmed that 2 individuals were tragically killed in a shooting at the Richmond Road Baptist Church in Lexington. The shooter, who had earlier injured a state trooper during a traffic stop, was also killed by law enforcement officers. Let's listen in to what Lexington Police Chief Lawrence Winters had to say.
Of Old Richmond Road. The suspect fired his weapon at individuals on church property. Preliminary information indicates that the suspect may have had a connection to the individuals at the church. 4 individuals were shot on church property. 2 female victims were pronounced deceased at the scene. The other 2 victims, both male, were transported to a local hospital. 1 victim was reported to have sustained critical injuries, and the other was reported in stable condition.
The Kentucky State Police are investigating the tragic events, and officials are urging prayers for the victims and their families during this difficult time. We're now joined by Madhav Nalapat to discuss this further. Madhav, it's another shooting in America, this time in the state of Kentucky, in a church, a place of worship. What are your thoughts about the current state of the United States in terms of its gun violence, its attitude towards the Second Amendment currently, especially under this president?
Well, I'd like to say that a church is supposed to be, a property where people go for peace and solace. They go there not for the excitement that you have in, let's say, a rock concert or something like that. They go for the very opposite. They go for solace, they go for consolation, and they go for a peaceful atmosphere. And you have the hymns and you have the choir, and all that is helpful in creating that kind of atmosphere. And the middle of that, to hear gunshots, in the middle of that, see people, falling down, and our prayers go out, of course, to the victims and their families. And but the reality of the situation is, Senator Rand Paul said, "Oh, this is so not Kentucky." Well, I'm sorry to say, this is very much part of USA today. The flooding of guns across the United States by the relaxation of the Trump administration on gun controls has made guns available about as freely as candy almost. And I'm sorry to say that is having its effect. So to say this is so not Kentucky, well, Kentucky has been a very distinguished part of America. It's got a one past behind it, and Senator Paul is an amazing individual, but the reality of the situation is, if he only looks around him at his own state, and the fact is we have got a lot of individuals who are unhappy with society, or unhappy with their relatives, or unhappy with something else, and they look at the television news and they look at the print media, and they see these shootings everywhere. So then they're tempted to follow, and they do, and they get that. Andy Warhol said that 1 minute of fame, but it's 1 minute of infamy, if I may say so. It's a very terrible thing that we have seen, and especially because it happened in a place where solace should be there, whether it's church, whether it's a temple, whether it's a synagogue, whether it's a mosque. It should be a place of solace,
of course,
not of shooting. And I'm really, really very, very saddened by what has happened in this church in Kentucky to these two innocent women and to the two men. And as for shooter, well, his motives we don't know. Probably we're never going to be very clear about it. But there are a large number of people who are not really fitting properly into society, who are often unemployed, underemployed, suffering financial hardship, having huge debts, and they just take their frustration out in this manner. And this is becoming more and more common, and it's really very sad.
Professor Madhav Nalapat, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. It was always a pleasure to have you. Well, that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.